Welcome to 10 for 10, the podcast that delves into 10 modern Israel concepts, each for about 10 minutes. We are Dr. Tal Grinfus David and Dr. Jonathan Golden. And today's episode will ask whether Israeli and Jewish diversity weakens the nation or strengthens it. Israeli citizens are extremely diverse, politically, religiously, ethnically, culturally, economically, and in their outlooks for the future. From the headlines and the Israel Democracy Institute polls, we gather that Israelis are very divided over political and religious issues, even polarized in some instances, as we discussed in our previous podcasts, like on IDF conscription, judicial reform, and more. According to Israel's Central Bureau of Statistics, out of just over 10 million citizens, about 20% of the population is Arab, including Muslims, Christians, and Druze. Estimates also show that between 10 to 15% of the population identify as LGBTQ+, and in Tel Aviv, that number rises to 25%. Clearly, the diversity in the way people identify and affiliate based on backgrounds and life experiences impacts their views, voting patterns, and Zionist visions for the future. There hasn't been a time in Jewish history I can think of where Jews were homogeneous and unified. In fact, we pride ourselves on arguing our points, whether in rabbinics, Zionism, politics, religious adaptations, and so much more. Jonathan, can you give us an example from history of when our diversity challenged the future of the nation?
The emergence of Judaism in the post-Second Temple period is an example of diversity as both a challenge and a strength. In the last years of the Second Temple, the sectarianism threatened to pull the Jewish people apart. With the loss of the Second Temple in the center of Jewish life, it was a challenge to imagine how Judaism would continue, particularly for those tied to the temple and its practices. The creativity and innovation of the rabbis allowed Judaism to endure and flourish in communities outside of Israel, and provided us with a beautiful tapestry of rituals, customs, and traditions of Jewish communities around the world. To be sure, when the modern Zionist movement began, it had to and continues to navigate the differences in figuring out how to shape and forge a Jewish home. How did diverse visions play a role in the early Zionist congresses?
Well, Zionist congresses were an exercise in compromising for a national future, with so much diversity represented from all the communities of Eastern and Western Europe. For example, at the Sixth Zionist Congress at Basel in 1903, Herzl proposed the British Uganda program as a temporary refuge for Jews in Russia in immediate danger. By a vote of 295 to 178, it was decided to send an expedition to examine the territory that was proposed. 3 days later, the British government released an official document allocating a Jewish territory in East Africa on conditions which will enable members to observe their national customs. Ultimately, the Uganda proposition was voted down in the Seventh Congress in 1905, but throughout those 2 years, emotions ran high. While some, including Herzl, Sirkin, and Zangwill, celebrated securing Uganda as a territory for Jewish sovereignty, others sat in mourning on the floor with ashes on their heads and torn suit lapels, demonstrating their grief at the loss of Eretz Yisrael, the covenantal promise. Had everyone agreed with Herzl, our national homeland might have been outside of Eretz Yisrael. And had they given in to polarization, we might not even have a sovereign home. Diversity, debate, strong conflicting opinions, arguments, and lots of passion shaped Zionist goals then. So to our question, does diversity strengthen us or weaken us as a nation? How would you respond, Jonathan?
I think about President Reuven Rivlin's Four Tribes speech, in which he identifies the four identity groups that correspond to four educational systems within Israel. He wonders and worries in his speech about what will keep the tribes together in the joint project in Israel. It's notable that he joined a group of well-known Israeli pop stars in 2019 for the celebratory song Shevet Achim V'Achayot, a tribe of brothers and sisters, as a way to champion and underscore a sense of underlying unity. As the chorus repeats the ideas of a shared home and heart that will not be abandoned, it proclaims the rootedness of the people in the land and the latest generations as the flowers and music of today. Still, even with cultural and practical efforts at unity, there remains an underlying tribalism noted by Rivlin that threatens to tear society apart at the seams. Tal, how have recent years, including post-October 7th, shaped the Zionist discussions of contemporary challenges?
Well, there have always been multiple streams of Zionist thought, which aimed at contending with the historical challenges to the nation in every decade. That is the same today. There are several Zionisms that seek to support Jewish sovereignty today and secure it for the future, but whose leaders and thinkers see those paths very differently. Let me give you one example. Religious Zionism has been a very vocal and highly contested movement in this debate, leaning heavily on their historical beliefs, priorities, and values since the time of Harav Kook, that Zionism is a core component of Orthodox Judaism. Religious Zionists believe that the land of Israel was promised by God to the Jewish people, and as such, they believe that protecting and defending the land is a holy obligation. They support Israel's settlements in the contested Palestinian territories, and they oppose Palestinian statehood or self-determination in Eretz Israel. Politically, in the last elections, they won 14 seats, a little over 11% of the total Israeli vote, and became a member of the governing coalition. Even as a minority in that 64 out of 120 seats, they have the power to dissolve the government with a no confidence vote, thereby exerting way more influence than their 11% voting bloc. It should be noted that their contributions and sacrifices in the IDF over the last 15 months have been heroic and tragic. They've become a major source of polarization due to their leaders' extremist views. We're talking here about Ben Gvir and Smotrich, and have even had a case filed in the international courts for incitement to genocide over several comments made about Palestinians throughout the war with Hamas. What do other Israelis think of them? Well, centrist and left-leaning Zionists like Yair Lapid, Gantz, and Gabay view their statements as racist and abhorrent, anti-democratic, and hate speech, while ultra-Orthodox communities shun them completely out of the belief that any Zionism postpones the coming of the Messiah. But interestingly, we are now seeing their views supported in the recent comments by President Trump and his administration when talking about the future of Gaza, removing the Palestinians from it and rebuilding it. We will see in the coming weeks and months whether the alignment of the religious Zionist views with American policymakers will convince Israelis, Arab nations, and other Western democratic countries to support the mass deportation of Palestinians. Doubtful. Jonathan, what have you seen from other streams of Zionism?
Avigdor Lieberman and the Jews of the former Soviet Union whom he represents bring a different sensibility to the questions of the role of Zionism in religion and contemporary challenges. While Lieberman may share the security goals and concerns of the political right, he and his community bristle at the role of religion in terms of civic participation and personal status issues. They want to see broader participation in IDF service, particularly by the Haredim or ultra-Orthodox. They want alternatives to the rabbinate in terms of marriage, divorce, conversion, and burial. They want a society of choices when it comes to Shabbat and Kashrut. Lieberman's voice and his party's slogan of yes to Judaism and no to coercion is one symbol of balancing the ideas of a Jewish and democratic state that have led to sharp divisions and multiple elections in recent years. While his electoral vote is smaller than it once was, ranging from 5 to 8 mandates in recent years after a peak of 15 seats in 2009, there is no doubt that his perspective in supporting voters led to the cycle of multiple elections that took place between 2019 and 2022. Thus, Israel will continue to contend and grapple with his secular, pragmatic, and hawkish approach as a key marker in Israeli political discourse. Tal, what do you notice about Zionist political parties on the center and the left in terms of contemporary challenges?
Well, while the left-leaning opposition parties that believed in a two-state solution as a path to security have been largely abandoned in the wake of October 7th, their streams of Zionism are still compelling to many from the cultural and labor Zionist streams of thought. I would recommend reading Yair Lapid's essay, I Am a Zionist, from 2011. The link is in our guide there, to get a glimpse into a different path to supporting the Jewish state. His party, Yesh Atid, received 24 seats in the last elections, and although in many ways similar to Lieberman's party platform in wanting equality for all citizens, economic, educational, health, and more, and rejecting preferential treatment for the ultra-Orthodox communities. The dovish nature of this movement's solution to the conflict stands apart from Lieberman's hawkish stance on Iran and its proxies. The left-wing party of Meretz did not even meet the electoral threshold and gained no seats in the Knesset, with less support than ever post-October 7th, because their call to end the Israeli occupation of the West Bank was perceived as an idealistic but dangerous proposal for the safety of Israelis. Though the left-wing parties are the oldest political institutions of the State of Israel and were a dominant political force in its first decades, recent events have led analysts to predict the demise of the left in Israeli politics. For them to rebound, labor and cultural Zionism will need to offer Israelis much more when it comes to what they offer as solutions to the conflict.
To start to wrap up today's conversations, there are short-term goals of Zionisms, securing the state and its people, both in the region from Iran and its proxies, and globally against rising anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And there are also long-term goals of Zionisms, like how to balance religion and democracy, how Israel will support its minorities, how Israelis and diaspora Jews will share visions for the future, and how Israel can play a contributing role in the world with 21st century challenges like climate change, water and natural resource scarcity, burgeoning societies and economic stability, innovation, health, agriculture, and so much more. Zionism will continue to find different paths to supporting the short and long-term goals.
As you reflect on this podcast, consider what you might prioritize as the goals of Zionisms and which stream of Zionist thought and philosophy best suits your values and beliefs. Ask yourself, will your path to support the future of Jewish sovereignty stand in opposition to that of others? And if so, what will you be willing to compromise on so as to strengthen the nation toward a common vision? Thank you for listening to The Goals of Modern Zionism. Does our diversity weaken us or strengthen us? Please visit our websites, heartstance.org and tgdconsulting.org, to download our family and educator guide with additional resources and discussion prompts.